Hello, folks. Welcome back to a new week on World War II TV, and we are looking at the effectiveness of the Churchill Crocodile with Dermot Rooney. Dermot has been on several times before and always brings a new angle to the study rather than just here's unit moving towards other unit. This is what happened. There's always this angle that I like. So I'll bring him in now. Good evening, Dermot. How are you today?
Hey, all right. Thank you.
So I think a lot of people watching will be aware of the concept of the flamethrower tank, and if they're not aware of the concept of the flamethrower tank, they are aware generally of the use of flamethrowers in World War II. And every military buff has kind of got some horrible story about flamethrowers, and that a veteran who could smell this or smell that, and so everyone's aware of the subject of it, but actually understanding in this sense how much impact they had on the battlefield. What kind of brought you towards studying this in terms of getting some data together?
Well, the Queen told me to do it, really.
Nice.
So, yeah, well, via some intermediaries. There was, I was a psychologist working for the Ministry of Defence about 30 years ago, and they did a big thing about trying to understand what we now kind of call tactical psychology in order to put it into operational research models. And the flame tank was a really good one. It was one of the big things that we had to get our heads around. And that was the thing that fell on my desk, really.
Well, there you are. So I'll bring up your PowerPoint. There we go. And folks, we'll kind of do questions, some of them as we go along, if they're kind of pertaining to the exact info Dermot is talking about. If there's any kind of broader questions about things generally, we can do them at the end. But I'm going to hand over to Dermot now. This is going to be a shorter show than usual, I think, because it's short and sweet, just like all the good things. So I'm going to hand over to Dermot to take us through this.
Cool. So the astute amongst you'll notice that's not a picture of a Churchill Crocodile. It's the armoured flame concept and how it works as a weapon system. Now down. What did I do for down? There we go. I remember now. I don't know what to do for down. You'll be familiar with this quote. This one's from, or versions of it. This one's from the US Marine Corps doctrine. War is both timeless and ever-changing. While the basic nature of war is constant, the means and methods we use evolve continuously. Essentially, our problem is, if we don't know what worked in the past, we can't say what's changed with the future. So people say things like drones and electronic warfare and persistent intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition, etc. has changed the ball game in Ukraine. But people, when they say that, they're often talking from a lack of understanding about how tactics worked back in the Second World War. And I keep going back to the Second World War because it's got the largest sample size that we've got that does combined arms warfare, the most accessible sample size. So I do tactical psychology. I mean, I don't usually get paid for that. That's the kind of the fun stuff. And our biggest hurdle, anybody that does this, is unlearning hollow tactical history. So quite often you'll see in very learned things, there'll be a discussion of a battle, the tactical level of a battle, and they'll be relying on a book by Patrick Delaforce. And Patrick Delaforce was great at doing his thing. He did a great service to old soldiers in the 70s and 80s. But in order to make something readable, he's compressed it an awful lot. And there are, the quotes like confused fighting. But if you unpick that, if you go to all the diaries and link them all together, and you go to all the communication logs and link them all together, you get a much richer picture. And that's what we do to understand how things work. This is the kind of stuff that I spit out. Is the graph on the top there? That's about flanking. So everybody knows, or everybody suspects, there's a psychological effect from flanking, and we've measured that. It's tricky to do a flanking attack, but if you do it, you're going to get a lot more enemy surrendering and loads more running away. But that doesn't get represented in training. So most army training is in virtual simulation or in live simulation, essentially a big game of laser tag. Don't let anybody tell you different. And if you outflank anything there, you don't get this psychological bonus. People don't run away. They just turn around and carry on fighting. They don't go, oh, we're going to lose. That doesn't cross their minds. They just carry on fighting. And the bottom graph there, that's the last time I was on, I did that. This is artillery suppression. This is a graph that's being amended now. The original idea in 1945 was that the more shells you throw at the baddies, the less guys you lose when you attack. And it turns out it's not to do with that. It's to do with other more complicated psychological and organizational things. And the reason that that's important is the picture on the right there, which is Ukraine. So Russians and Ukrainians, up until the recent shell shortage, were dropping World War II size fire plans and not getting the result that they got in the Second World War. Some of that's all the new stuff, but some of that's not knowing what the old stuff are, the things that worked in the good old days. I'll talk about Crocs quite a lot. When I talk about Crocs, I'm not talking about rubber slippers. I'm talking about Churchill Crocodile. I'll give you a little chat about a situation context. I'll briefly skim the mechanics. There's loads of other people out there who know more about this than I do. So let's do the mechanics now. What you've got is essentially you've got a standard Churchill gun tank. So that's an infantry support tank. It's kept entirely the same, except they rip out the hull-mounted machine gun and they replace it with a flame projector. They put in an awful amount of plumbing that runs through that, out the back, through a complicated but sturdy arrangement, onto a 4-ton armoured Bowser at the back that contains, I think it's 300 litres of essentially napalm. It's jellied petrol, but it uses a different, it might be gallons. Oh, God. It might be 400 gallons. I've had that brain fart. I'm ever so sorry. Of jellied petrol. So it flies a long way and it sticks to things. And then it catches fire, or it's on fire as it goes. It's not very good off-road. It's about the wet feeling I get from reading war diaries. It's about as good as a Sherman off-road. It's nowhere near as good as a standard Churchill gun tank. The problems come when you get into an urban environment and it can't turn very well. You can't do a neutral turn like you can in a normal tank. You can't reverse very well because it's something to do with the tracks and the way the wheels go backwards. It's not like reversing a normal trailer. As soon as you hit a rock or a bump or anything, then it all kind of clusters up and you get a bit of a disaster and you have to abandon the vehicle. So there are problems there, but it's a brilliant system, heavily armoured piece of kit to get some flame towards the end. I'll talk a little bit about its effectiveness. I'll talk about how the system worked. Oh, there we go. We've got.
I looked it up for you.
Knows more about it than I do.
It was me. It was Wikipedia knew it.
So I'll talk about how the system works. So it's the system rather than the machine itself, and why this system stopped working, and then a bit of a so what. We'll have to do a bit of ethics to start with. Everybody else was doing it. The Brits caught on a little bit late to armoured flame. There's a Russian one there. There's an Italian one there, and there's 2 German ones down at the bottom. They all tried these. They didn't have a great deal of success. To our modern 21st century outlook, this is a horrific weapon. And yeah, it is. But at the time, everybody else was doing it, although the flamethrower itself was described as an inhuman projection of the German scientific mind in the First World War. By the Second World War, everybody was kind of comfortable with it. To get an angle on that, try reading this book stuck in the middle there, Mr. Home, pronounced Hume, by William Douglas Hume. He was a young officer in the 141 RAC, and he didn't mind being a troop leader of flamethrower tanks. But he did mind about bombing Le Havre when it was full of civilians. And he refused a lawful order and went to prison for a year for not taking part in that attack, for refusing to take part. But he didn't whinge about driving a flamethrower tank. So that just gives you an idea about where the moral standpoint was at the day, back in the day. So the British development really goes back to the Petroleum Warfare Department. 1940, as everybody listening to this knows better than I do, large part of the British Army comes back to Britain, leaves large amounts of its equipment in Europe. We've got lots of people, we've got lots of enthusiasm, but we don't have much in the way of defences. We've also got an awful lot of fuel. People talk about fuel rationing, but that was mainly to stop people moving and going away from their jobs and living out in the country, trying to stop the kind of COVID-style working from home excuse. There was a lot of fuel, and the Petroleum Warfare Department made all these things to do it. The idea, the top scheme was we're going to have walls of flame ringing the coast, spurting from the hedges and rolling down hills. We will burn the invader back into the sea. If you get a chance, this rather dozy-looking beige book, when you get into it, is full of lovely stuff, and that is by, I can't see his name now. Oh, got my normal glasses on.
You need to put them on.
I know I'd have to put them on, and then I'll be all reflective. It's by Donald Banks. And he was in charge of the Petroleum Warfare Department. Look at that. Look like a freak with my glasses. Yeah. So they had all these ideas. So you see that picture on the right. That is a fixed thing supposedly going to protect an airfield from German gliders and parachutists by squirting this rod of flame up into the sky should they happen to fly directly over it. There was a similar system that was going to be on ships, and they fitted it to a couple of ships to try it out. The idea was a Stuka might try and bomb the ship, and if it so happened to fly directly above the 600 gallons of fuel that we've stored on the deck of the ship, we could squirt it straight upwards and set fire to it. There were some snags with that. Other kind of Heath Robinson contraptions set fire to the sea, set fire to the beach, set fire to the exits to the beach. Essentially big barrels of petrol that were going to blow up in the road, trebuchets that threw petrol, giving Dad's army a kind of a manually pumped flamethrower, all a little bit dodgy, and they didn't really get their act together. The peak of this was the cockatrice, which is essentially that flamethrower you can see in the picture on the right, attached to an armoured bread van that would drive around an airfield, hopefully setting fire to parachutists as they landed. All very jolly archy sticks, but nothing really came of it. It didn't get used because the Germans didn't invade. But by 1942, tables turning, we're going to attack. We're going to need to have flame to get over the pillbox problem. So the pillbox problem that existed in the First World War, there's some lovely books on the way about that. That's got to be solved. How can we get rid of that stuff? A big armoured thing that squirts flames into embrasures, that squirts flames into houses, that squirts flames into strong points. That's a great thing because it gets us over that open ground if they haven't got good anti-tank defences or if we suppress anti-tank defences. There was a problem with a kind of what we call manoeuvrist. So the British Army's got a manoeuvrist doctrine, and the idea being, we're going to break through and do all that kind of little heart type thing, expanding torrent. But most people don't really understand it beyond that. And so it's called manoeuvrist. We've got a rough idea that, hordes of armour are going to sweep over the North German plain and the war's going to be over by Christmas. And a lot of the armoured corps and the cavalry in particular had that ethos that we're there to do this breakout. So nobody wants to drive this thing, which is so focused on close support. Got built anyway. The Churchill Oki, I think that's the top picture there. Deployed during Dieppe. Not a great success, apparently. But lessons were learned from that. We need this system to get over the Atlantic Wall, over the West Wall, and any of those urban ops that we're going to be fighting. 1944 comes along. Perfectly viable weapon system. The Crocodile we spoke about before. Here it comes. The machine works, but we don't have the system itself. Next page. He said, oh, God, I'm to the next slide. I'm not pressing the button. So we're jumping forward to 1947. We're doing the operational analysis, looking back over the entire war. And when I was saying that they've got a weapon, but they've not got a weapon system, this looked at the system. It compared about 230 attacks where most of them were supported by Churchill Crocodiles, but some of them were just supported by infantry gun tanks or by Sherman gun tanks. And when it compared those two types of attacks, they found all those physical problems that mentioned earlier with the Churchill Crocodile, but they also found that to squirt the fuel, you had to get it into an embrasure or through a window or through a hole that somebody's made in a building, you have to get it very close. And you get a lot of splashback. Splashback goes on the tank itself and on any supporting infantry. So that discourages close support from the infantry. Despite that, they found that attacks that were supported by crocodiles were 2 to 2.5 times more effective than those that were supported only by gun tanks. Those attacks had a 94% success rate. So pretty much you're guaranteed to win if you get these flame tanks. And in those attacks, the attacking infantry's casualties were halved. So you imagine saying to a battalion commander, we've got this thing, it'll halve your attack casualties. It's make it almost certain that you're going to win. And everybody went for it. There was no difference in defender casualties. So that's one of the indicators that there was this giant morale effect. And they also found that in about half of the actions, there was little or no resistance after the flame. So the crocs would turn up, the flame would start, and white flags would appear in windows. Now, our question was, what was the difference about the other half? Why sometimes flame gets people to put their hands up straight away, and other times it doesn't? Well, it's because they've got a weapon, but not a weapon system. They'd only got a draft doctrine. I've decided to call it, I've made up this phrase, cook, shock and mop. It was overly focused on the physical characteristics of the flame. It can suffocate this kind of target. It can set fire to this kind of target. It can kill this many people by setting light to them, and this is how it works. And then it's got this morale effect. Everybody expected there to be some morale effect because nobody wants to be set fire to. But the doctrine at the time was one of shock. It was armor focused, which involved the Crocodile driving at its full road speed of 12 miles an hour, but still quite a lot faster than an infantry soldier can walk or run, get close into the enemy within that effective range and squirt rods of flame at everything. And that will shock the enemy, and then they'll either run away or they'll surrender. The infantry then come along and they accept those surrenders, they mop up and they sweep up the ash. There was hardly any collective training. So if you take the example of 141 RAC, who were the first proper unit that went into Northwest Europe and had been converted to Crocodiles, I think they were infantry up until about 1942. Then they converted to tanks, and in late 43 to 44, they went through the conversion process to being flame tanks. They got hardly any time to do collective training. And when they did, those few infantry that they trained with weren't the same infantry that they fought with when they landed on the beaches. You get the D-Day, D+1, D+2 diaries. You get a lot of examples of, and we were attacking this village and a Churchill Crocodile happened to drive past, and we said, can you flame this for us? And they said, yeah. Or they said, I'm sorry, we're out of fuel, we're out of pressure, or we've got to be somewhere else. And they left us to it. They never seemed to be where they were supposed to be. But again, so they developed this gradual, inconsistent coordination. People picked up different ways of doing things at different rates, and the infantry learned one trick, and the armor learned the other trick, and the flame tanks learned another trick, we think. So part of this was the organisation. 21st Armoured Group was, I would say, overly modular. You would have an infantry division, and that would have, under command, would have an armoured brigade, and down at brigade level, the infantry brigade would have in support an armoured squadron. And in support of that armoured squadron would be a troop of Churchills. So the chain of command from the battalion commander, who's below brigade, he doesn't really have the full right to say, go in and do this now. There's a bit of a trade-off, there's a bit of leeway, and constantly moving from one organisation to the next. So the Crocodiles were constantly supporting different people. So they never got a chance to bed in all their skills that they would need to do these tricks we'll talk about in a moment. Even so, there was this huge morale effect, but it seemed almost at random. Sometimes they'd have to cook everybody. Sometimes they'd get everybody surrendering. Two nice pictures there, both from the Imperial War Museum set. You can see the flame projector there with some residual flame coming around it. And there's a bottom one that Flames in the Snow, a lovely British Army Review article. That's where I first saw that picture 30 years ago. Now, we're lucky that Naval and Military Press have republished Playboys. Sorry, the cover is actually this, if you see it. Lovely stuff. You don't often get a squadron history published, but here it is. And that's full of lovely stuff. To modernise, especially to civilians and people who haven't done a lot of war reading, it's full of borderline barbarity. You've only got to look at the cover on the right there. They've got the skull, they've got the cocktails, they're smoking the fags. They're classy killers. They're like James Bond back in the old James Bond days. That's how they saw themselves. Their use of the Crocs. There was a discussion about whether they go in first, whether they go in second, whether they go instead of the infantry. But usually they went in whenever. There was this element of no plan survives contact with the enemy. And repeatedly, if you read through the Playboys book, which I highly recommend, if you read through that, you'll get to, we rocked up and we were supposed to support A company attacking the village. But they'd already gone. So we went and supported D company attacking the wood. or they'd just arrive and they'd be told, there's your objective off there, some infantry will follow you, or some infantry won't follow you, or the infantry are already in. And they would just, by the time they got there with that overly modular thing and all the delays and frictions of war, they'd get thrown in all over the place. The big thing of the book that struck me was there's a remarkable lack of tactical introspection. So if you're used to Rommel's infantry attacks or Sidney Jerry's 18 platoon, or with the jocks, you look down and you see it describes a battle and it says what happened and it learns some lessons from it. They're all just seem to be getting thrown in. They're events that they remember uniquely from the perspective of the squadron itself. And there seems to be some kind of attribution bias. When they do get surrenders, it seems that they're by chance because people surrender because their morale has folded. People surrender because they're scared of flame. The tactics don't pop up. And there's this lethality terror focus. You know, we're going to burn things and we're going to shock them, just like the doctrine said. But a large part of it was kind of locus of control. Again, because of that organization, you would rock up and someone would say, set fire to that thing over there. And you set fire to that thing over there. And then you couldn't go any further because the road was blocked. And so you didn't see the whole battle. So they don't see where they're at. And that maneuverist idea that I spoke about earlier seems to be in the squadron's diaries and histories and everything that pertains to people who use crocodiles, that they saw the way they were used as being penny packeted, like a lot of the armour does. The Sherman regiments in particular saw themselves being penny packeted. And here's a quote from another one of the histories. 2 squadrons of crocodiles flaming at once on a relatively narrow front would strike terror into anyone's heart. Now, that might be true. I don't doubt it is, to be fair. But that would have required all of the crocodiles that you could get to in 21st Army Group and sweeping them all up and putting them all on one objective. They rarely had 2 squadrons operating in a day across the entire Army Group. Getting them all together and putting them on one objective would be, a bit of a risky experiment. So here's some battles I know quite a lot about, and I'll get that kind of quivery eye now, because these 4.5 battles I'm going to talk about took me about a month to get right, and I'm going to talk to them in about 2 minutes. So let's get on. So 53rd Division had crocodiles supporting them on the first day of Operation Veritable, which is what my thesis is about, and it's going to be coming out in the book very soon, etc., etc. And there are crocodiles on the first day that didn't quite get to the objective. They may have projected flame towards that and had a minor contribution in the outcome of the battle, but they got bogged down. Then the division as a whole went and fought in the Reichswald for a week and a bit, and the crocodiles were not used. Then they kind of recovered from that because the blokes were exhausted because they're sleeping in tea bags for a week and occasionally getting shelled and having to do assaults and all sorts of bad things, but mainly digging up roads and digging out bogged tanks. And then they were earmarked to break out from Goch, so that British Army's arguably the biggest urban battle, which is just off the north of this map here. And they were going to attack Wetzlar, written Wies, pronounced Wetzlar, just off the bottom of the map here. The planning was a little bit higgledy-piggledy because it hadn't considered the ground in between them. I suspect another division was supposed to have cleared the ground between them, and at the last minute they found out that they had to clear this area too. What was supposed to happen was they were going to assault the Ottersgraben. So the number 1 at the bottom there, that's on the Ottersgraben waterway. It links the River Neers with another one I forget the name of, off to the left. And it's essentially like a little canal. And they were going to bridge that. The crocodiles were going to support that assault to help get the division over that. And then they were going to break into Wetzlar and burst off down south the way they go. That all kind of went to pieces. And you'll see the number 2 there. 6th Battalion Royal Welsh Fusiliers got hung up there in the hamlet of Host, essentially just a collection of farms, really. And there was a German unit that held out repeatedly there. And the flame tanks that were due to assault the crossing had to go in there and flame the Germans that were in those farm buildings. Then they had to go back and refuel. They had to get repressurized. And they came back on, and the plan has changed again. They're thinking they're going to go and assault the crossing, but no, they've been told that they're going to assault this wood here. And that's down as being wood 9239 in their orders. And you'll notice that in wood 9239, in grid square 9239, there is another wood. And that had the 4th Battalion, the Welsh Regiment in it. They became separated from their infantry. They became separated from their supporting armour. They turned right too soon and set fire to 4 Welsh. About 25 casualties there, about 10 guys killed as far as I can work out. It's kind of brushed over in the histories, but it was a horrible thing. That led to or contributed to the entire collapse of the divisional attack. Churchill got involved, a brigadier got sacked, and they did another version of the attack. This time they were going to attack from the northeast. So over the other side of the river, off to the right, the main attack was going to come down there. And 4th Battalion Royal Welsh Fusiliers, not shown on this, were going to assault the crossing as kind of a diversion. But this time when it went in, perhaps due to not wanting to be near the tanks that set fire to your mates, the Crocodiles went in a full hour before the infantry did their assault. And they just squirted rods of flame across the canal, set fire to big houses, and then drove back up the road. And one of them was taken out by an anti-tank gun on the way. So there was a separation there. 53rd Division didn't use tanks. They didn't use Crocodiles for the next 2 weeks of the operation. And that was their last play with the with Crocodiles in Veritable. They did use them again later on. So we're getting the picture I'm giving you now is there's lots of difficulties. All the ones, there are lots of incidents where it just doesn't work. These are incidents where you don't get large numbers of surrendering. So one thing I should have said is there was some morale effect from those buildings being set fire on that final assault because one of the paratroopers had been defending it. Set fire, ran backwards through his lines, alight, and that disturbed everybody. But it didn't disturb everybody for the full hour, maybe 2 hours before the infantry assault started coming in. By that time, everybody bedded down because there was no coordination. Now, we've got lots of hints there, but here's a guy I interviewed years ago. So I wasn't interviewing him for this. He's just an old boy from where I live. And he was an armoured recce guy. His name isn't Trooper Brooks, but he was one of those blokes who wouldn't talk about the war if you're going to use his name because he thought anybody who appeared in print or wrote a book was a show-off. And he didn't want to say anything that might shine badly on his mates. So I'll give you this thing, and this is kind of the nub of it. So out of the mouths of actual squad is this bit. So after the breakout, the regiment was supported by a troop of Crocodiles. So he's in an armoured regiment, and they get supported by Crocodiles, and the regiment itself supports infantry. Again, special Churchill tanks with built-in flamethrowers and a petrol Bowser hooked to the back. As recce troop, our job was to work our way around the village in our little honey tanks. Everybody who went in honey deserved a medal, I think. To attract fire from any 88s in there, report back on what we'd seen, and look out for any Jerry trying to slope off before our boys went in. There might be some artillery to get any anti-tank guns and SPs, that's self-propelled guns, he felt he had to explain to me, buttoned, and then the Shermans might put a few rounds into the village, then in would go the Crocodiles and the bloody foot sloggers. Before anybody got in range, the Crocodiles would fire off a few jets to let Jerry know what was coming, and then they'd walk with the infantry up to the edge of town. Meantime, Jerry was having a quick chat about their prospects, and 10 to 1 they'd be waving bed sheets before the Crocs got in range. There was the odd time when they'd chance a few shots at the Croc or fire a Spandau at the infantry, but that would just draw fire from the Shermans, and they'd get a few squirts from the flamethrowers before we'd let them surrender. They mostly couldn't wait to throw the towel in. Didn't matter who they were, SS, paratroops, it didn't matter. Once they'd had the carrot and the stick waved at them, carrot and stick, big wink here, they packed it in. Then we'd all have a brew and a fag before heading off to round up the next lot. There was a couple of times that the old Bush Telegraph had been at work and their officer flagged us recce boys down, and the whole lot surrendered before the rest of the outfit even got there. 60-odd of them with an SP and bazookas, and they were all sat chatting and smoking our fags by the time the Crocs turned up. But we'd usually have to wait for the big stick, the Crocs, and the big carrot, the infantry, that they felt they could surrender to. The trick didn't always work. We got cocky once with it and went off half-cocked, double cock there, Sent the crocs in before the infantry caught up with us. Didn't work at all. Jerry knocked out one croc and damaged another, and we had to pull out till the next day before going in again. No carrot, you see. Very messy when we went back in too. Arty boys smashed the place to bits, but we still lost blokes and we had to burn the whole lot. There was no bloody handy hock on that pig of a day, I can tell you. So that's an example of how it worked and an example of how it didn't, all come from one guy, and their gang seemed to have worked out this system. And it's this carrot and stick thing and showing it. So it's the lovely plucky Tommy we can surrender to, horrible instant death that's next to him, and it's been shown to us really obviously that this is going to happen. When we look back at this, about 10 years ago was the last time I had a good look at this. We saw about one surrender to one killed when flamethrower tanks are used on their own. Here's a Vietnam picture, just to show you we look at other wars from time to time. But when you combine the carrot, the stick, you get 30 surrenders to one killed. And that's the figure from that 1947 operational research report. So on average, when you support infantry assaults with crocodiles, they found you got 30 German surrender for everyone that you killed. So that's bits of Northwest Europe, mostly Northwest Europe, bits of Italy, and maybe a bit of the Far East too. I can't quite remember that. So here's my dodgy data alert. So what I've done is I've gone back through my veritable actions, which I know quite well, and that sample they've got of I think it's about 230 individual actions, and I found some that I can trace to diaries and I can trace to books. And so these figures are a bit dodgy, so don't worry too much about them. But if you just do an infantry attack in Northwest Europe, that's my comfort zone, in 1945, you get roughly 2 German surrender for everyone you killed. If you do if you do just armoured flame, you seem to have to kill 2 people to get 1 surrender.
Right.
If you combine the infantry and the armour, you're in that middle zone, infantry and armour just there, you get about 10 to 1 surrenders. So 10 guys surrender for everyone you killed. But if you do that and the display, so you do that squirt first, here it comes, guys, you know it's coming, you get about 50 surrenders to everyone that you kill. And if you just do armour, flame and display, you get about 5 to 1. Seems to be, but there's so few of those. I mean, it's a really bit dodgy. So what you've got here is you've got like a magic number there. If I want to re-emphasize this dodgy data warning. If I looked at 5 more attacks, all these numbers would probably change if they were really good ones.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's that order of magnitude. It's that rough kind of area. But going back to that 1947 report. I'll read this bit as well. Sorry about this. Just to see what they did with it in 1947. So civilized and uncivilized men have a deep-rooted fear of fire. This is not an intuitive fear. Babies have no fear of fire. That was a thing they found out in the First World War, in the Second World War, I think, because right at the start, it's all this innate fear of flame. And the Japanese supposedly had this even stronger innate fear of flame because they all live in wooden houses and, we're kind of racists. And so we lump an entire nation into one thing. But it is found on painful experience. Any known method of killing, wounding or hurting naturally inspires fear, but flame differs from many weapons in being distinctly visible. A sheet of flame from a flamethrower advertises itself most effectively, whilst a machine gun bullet is only recognised by the sound it makes as it passes or by the pain that it inflicts as it strikes. The entire basis of small arms suppression is based on that, and that's quite a big thing in operational research and doctrine. This difference between flame and bullets can be expressed in another way. Flame allows the defender a choice of alternatives. At the first sight of flame, he can decide to stay where he is and fight to the end, or he can decide to run away at once, or when conditions become physically intolerable. In short, a defender needs seldom become a casualty from flame. With bullet weapons, however, owing to the lack of self-advertisement, the defender does not have these 2 alternatives thrust at him with such force. On an a priori reasoning, therefore, flame might be expected to have a greater effect on morale than bullet weapons or high explosives. Then the report, except for one line, which I'm going to give you in a minute, then the report, having said the effect is entirely, the massive part of the effect is this psychological impact that it has. And then it spends one paragraph talking about that, and then 23 pages talking about our different ways of setting fire to people with globs of fuel. This is the kind of thing it then spits out. This is how you can suffocate people in the best way. You just put that together in the right way. And this is that one line I was going to tell you about. It was thought the Japanese troops were standing and fighting to the last, but further studies showed they had no alternative. The exits to their caves or bunkers being closed by demolitions. So we often talk about the Japanese surrendering to the last man, but I mean, you did Saipan a few weeks ago, didn't you, Woody?
Yep.
And there we Guy Gabaldon got about 1,500 Japanese to surrender, while at the other end of the island, people were being thrown off. But I'll just go back to that last comment. So that last section there, it's all focused on the flame. It's not focused on the carrot and stick. The flame advertises itself, and that's a big part of it. But there's nothing to surrender to. People really don't like surrendering to tanks because tanks don't like being surrendered to. They tend to shoot people who get anywhere close to them who might have a Panzerfaust down that tries a leg. So what happened after the war? In the UK, we did a physical double down. All the research after that was focused on making a universal Crocodile kit, with making that stick with the doctrine that was evolving at the time, with making a 200-meter, one that would fire out to 200 meters. So it did about an 80-meter effective range during the war. If we could get that out to 200 meters, we'd be out of the range of most of those Panzerfausts. My concern there is that would put you out of the range where you can effectively see the other people as people and accept their surrender. But you can see why that was going on. And there was no tactical lessons document, as far as I can find. So that one there, the 1947 one, that's as far as it goes. They're just going to go in and go back to the old doctrine of setting fire to everything, cook, shock and mop. There was a lot of mini-myths and cat badge rivalries that went on, and the Cold War concepts got in the way. So essentially, when the Cold War thing kicked in, we're going to be fighting a great big defensive delay battle through Germany, and then we're going to be using nuclear weapons. The idea of something that's going to offensively get into the detail of an urban battle is not really on the cards, and it fell away. And then the next thing is this mechanics of distaste, I've decided to call it, is that reading between the lines of Playboys and other books that are about people, there's a wonderful one, Wilson's Flamethrower is a great one, also 141 REC. That while at the time they bigged it up, they really didn't like it. Two of the guys that I spoke to back in the day who talked about the horrible thing that you all hear is the screaming of the horses when the farmhouse is burning. And two of the guys I interviewed said, yes, when they say that, they don't mean horses, they mean people. It's just because you can't say people very easily. It's because you were associated with setting fire to folks. And there's a kind of a distancing yourself from it. So the real tankies, who want to sweep across the North German plain, they didn't want to be doing that job. And most people, you give them the chance, what do you want to be in? I don't want to be in something that gets really close to the enemy and has got a giant fuel bowser at the back of it. So I think that's all part of it. In the US, I'll go back to the UK in a minute, but in the US, there's another funky book. I'm going to do that other book hold up thing. Sorry. There you go. Flame Dragons of the Korean War. It's a tough read unless you know the people who are in it. But if you go through that, when they were deployed and they used these boyos down at the bottom in the picture there, you've essentially got a coaxially mounted flame projector next to a 105mm gun, the Sherman. They've got no fuel bowser, so their fuel is really rather limited for the flame projector. They were used as flame tanks a couple of times, torched some villagers that may or may not have had bad guys in them, but they definitely torched some villagers. And from that point on, I think this mechanics of distaste thing kicked in, and they were used as gun tanks. They were used as the artillery. They drove up a ramp and used a 105 as artillery, and they were never used as flame tanks again. Britain sent some of these show you the chat picture in a minute. Sorry. Then we get on to, so essentially they're doing what would have been called pepper pot in World War II. So that's what they went to. In Vietnam, there was various flame tanks hanging about, and they were used, to clear forests, to clear areas, to do stuff, to get rid of people who were in trenches and holes and villages. The couple of the M113s, the troop, not an infantry fighting vehicle, APC.
APC, yeah.
They strapped two of them to a riverboat, both facing in different directions, and drove the riverboat up the river. And that was used as the flame projector was used as an anti-ambush device. They diverted to air napalm, and then after the Vietnam War, with everything like Napalm Girl, the picture of the girl running away from the burning village, there was a level of distaste crept up, and that increased. And all the flame weapons in the US arsenal were retired in 1978. And by retired, I think that means they're parked in the desert somewhere. But I don't know. So the end of Crocodiles. I'm sorry if the writing's small here. This is the Centurion Crocodile kit fitted to a Centurion, the universal tank that Monty was waiting for. So you can see it's the same Bowser thing. It's got a very similar system of pipes going through it. And they had to design this thing to squirt out to 80 meters out in front of them. And they got it going. It worked. And they sent some to Korea, but as far as I can tell, they were only ever used as gun tanks, not as flamethrowers. So why did Crocodiles end? So a lot of people say, well, flamethrowers are illegal, and they're not. They are frowned upon under Protocol 3 of the Convention on Conventional Weapons, brackets flame. I think that's the wording of it. So they are usable, but you're not supposed to set fire to things from the sky. So the best way this was described to me was during those recent Israeli raids in Gaza, where they went in to get some Hamas cell that was in a hospital. It would have been illegal for them to just napalm bomb the hospital. But it wouldn't have been illegal for them to take a flamethrower in with them, with infantry supporting a raid, and then set fire to the bad guys. And if they accidentally set fire to some civilians as well, then there's an argument about proportionality. You're not allowed to set fire to woods and forests unless the bad guys are in them. So why would you set fire to them anymore? Maybe you could just be clearing things like gardening. There's the moral objection. That doesn't seem to be a big thing. This mechanics of distaste bit, the moral bit, when we're all heading for nuclear war and things like that, the moral bit doesn't seem to be up front. The mechanics of distaste thing, nobody really wants to drive it and nobody really knows where it's going to fit. There's a kind of a tactical amnesia thing. So because that lessons report never got written, nobody knew why it was getting so many people surrendering or on what the circumstances were when it didn't work. And the Cold War doctrine, as I mentioned before. So all that admin and engineering came in the way as well. So how do you cut up your Crocodile tanks? You can't make a regiment like you used to do before. So you would convert a troop or a squadron out of a regiment. And who gets picked to do that job? And who does that job? And looking after that, where all the kit's a little bit odd, the logistics of it get in the way. But I think the big reason is this top left, 11 o'clock one, that nobody important noticed what the effect was. And so it kind of got forgotten. So what? So what? We've got a paradoxically moral weapon. It looks like it's a horrific thing, but it gets loads of people to surrender, and you don't have to cook many people when you use it right. What's the problem with using it? Don't know. These are a dilemma. It simply seems to have gone out of fashion. So when we revisited this 10 years ago for Brains and Bullets, it was an effort to understand the deep structure, that carrot and stick and display of the carrot and stick fits right in with game theory. It fits right in with most psychology, about psychology of survival. And that's how people behave when they get that thing going. And it puts it it makes it in an obvious physical way that soldiers can understand. So we can use this as a teaching point to teach them tactical psychology. And though the argument used to be, we need the same approach, but with a different weapon, because we don't have flame tanks anymore and everybody frowns on them. And then you get into a little bit of a loop. Then, well, what would you use? And a lot of people just don't compute. They don't translate from one weapon system to another. They move from one weapon to the same system. Sorry, I should say. But since then, I think we've got to be prepared for the return of armoured flame. Protocol 3 is weak, as I said before, and out in Afghanistan, wrong war, out in Ukraine, we're getting thermobaric munitions. So there's a thermobaric rocket being fired back at the Russians, been captured by the Ukrainians. Wide use of mines. So even though Britain's out of, we don't use mines because we're not allowed to. We've signed up to not use them. Cluster munitions being used, white phosphorus being used. In an anti-personnel role, there's very strong evidence of tear gas being used. So tear gas, you can use it to disperse crowds in a civilian context, but you can't use it in war. That's actually in the main core of the conventional weapons laws. And they're also using artificial intelligence. Something that was having a difficulty telling the difference between a cat and a dog 5 years ago is now being used for targeting. It's quick, but potentially error-prone. There were two proposals to bring back armoured flame during the global war on terror, when we're fighting amongst the people, simply for the physical characteristics of flamethrowers, as personnel, man-packed flamethrowers that we're talking about. But bring them back. So I think there's a danger that these things might come back, and we need to be prepared for how to fight with them and fight against them. And I think, apart from all the things I forgot to say and the things I said wrong, that's me done.
Well, fantastic stuff. Brilliant. There's a couple of questions, which I saved to the end because I didn't want you were on a roll. So there we go. The training. I mean, the training of the RAC units to use the crocodiles. I mean, it's kind of vaguely point it and press the button. I mean, there's no. How does that work? I mean, I know that's sort of beyond the psychology aspect you're talking about, but with main weapons on tanks, it's basically artillery, isn't it? It's basically angles and math and calculations. But how the training is point and click, is it?
No, it's I'm perhaps overdoing it there. They'll have done drills. They've worked out some drills, but they've never fully embedded collective training. So nowadays we get the armour and the infantry not as much as they would like. By the time you've learned all the skills you need to operate and maintain your tank and use it as a tank, then the time you've got to train with the infantry and use it as a make it into the weapon system that works, that's what we always lose out on. And it's the same with everything. And because they were so far down the food chain and they came to it so late, I mean, our armoured doctrine hadn't sorted itself out by 1945. So why would armoured flame doctrine be expected to do the same with only, a run-up of only, 3 months before DDay?
Yeah. Good question from Ian Carr about this carrot and display aspect you're talking about. Was there any propaganda distributed to the Germans about the effect of crocodiles? I mean, did we ever try and warn people in advance, we've got these things coming your way?
I don't know. I know that there was some effective use of psyops, loudspeakers on the day. So I haven't brought that book to wave at you. The First and the Last by Sterling, and it's about the 4th 7th Dragoon Guards, 4th 7th Guard EG.
Yeah, I know it. Yeah.
Lovely, one of my favourite books there. And they integrated it with the loudspeakers that they had on the tanks. So they drive up to the edge of the village, and they did a very similar thing to what Trooper Brooks was talking about. And they shouted first. They came over. The flamethrowers are coming. I think you ought to surrender. And off they pull. And they had one example where a German popped out of a thing. So tank squadron leader who speaks German is on the loudspeaker speaking German to the Germans to tell them to come out and surrender. They come out to surrender, and the infantry who don't speak German, who are British, then shoot them, and then they have to fight anyway. So the crocodiles go in. So that becomes one of those things. They offered us surrender, and then they killed our mates, so we're going to fight to the last. It became one of those things, as far as I can tell.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Gary August. Is Dermot aware of the outrage, particularly the SS, of the Germans regarding crocodiles as a weapon of war to the point any captured crews were shot? The irony, he adds at the end.
Well, there is the irony, but there is also, Germans had about 1,000 different types of flamethrower tanks. They don't appear to have learned the trick of getting people to surrender because they were just going to kill everybody anyway. So that's the SS on one side. So they thought of it. So it wasn't really that. I was speaking to Neil, whose surname escapes me the other day, who's done a thing. He knows more about crocodiles than I do, and he knows more about tanks and everything than I do. And he found very few examples of crocodile crews being machine gunned. You get a lot of examples of Sherman crews being machine gunned and Churchill crews being machine gunned. They just get machine gunned anyway. They jump out of the tank and you shoot them. That's pretty much par for the course. So I don't think that it really happened that much.
Not as much of a thing as people perhaps think it is. Okay.
Yeah.
And then my last question is the fear effect among the Germans, and it's going to be a question that you're not going to be able to answer, but it just came to me anyway, is do you think if you're a German soldier, you're more afraid of the crocodile if you've seen it used a couple of days earlier and you've seen what it does, or are you more scared of the idea of it? Because is it something that you would think is worse than it is, or less than it is? Because we've seen footage ourselves, most of us who are on YouTube, of what these things can do. But if someone says they're bringing up flame stuff, are you imagining it spouting 20 feet, 200 feet, 300?
Yeah.
Have you got any ideas on that? What?
I don't know. So I know that on Okinawa, once they got their loudspeaker thing going, and they'd worked out how to talk to Japanese people, partly from learning from Guy Gabaldon. So on Okinawa, they did the loudspeaker thing saying, Japanese soldiers, we are the given authority here. Come out and surrender. We have got flamethrowers. Assemble at point A, and you will be taken care of. You won't be harmed, and blah, blah, blah. And you get quite a lot of them surrendered. And part of the reason they weren't surrendered before was A, they weren't losing quite so much, but B, they weren't given the option. It'd be, well, let's block up both ends of the cave system and set fire to the middle of it. Did I answer the question there, or did I answer a different?
No, I think you did. No, I mean it's just I'm thinking about myself on the battlefield, and if you're German by 1945 and you're still alive and you've been fighting for several months or years, you've had everything. You've had dive bombers and artillery and machine guns and high level bombing, and what's going to put the fear of God in you? I mean, we're talking last week about the Germans are much more afraid on the battlefield of the enemy, the Yabos, the dive bombers, than they are artillery. It's artillery that's actually killing them in far greater numbers than the aircraft are. So what you believe you're afraid of isn't necessarily what's more likely to kill you.
Yeah. So the Americans did the same. They started off being more afraid of dive bombers because each dive bomber looks like it's diving at you. Air attacks look like they're coming to get you, and artillery just seems to arrive. But after about 3 weeks in contact, they decided to be more afraid of mortars because that's what they realised was killing everybody. So it changes over time. Part of me thinks that the Churchill infantry display combo might not have worked anywhere near as well than in Northwest Europe because of the way the terrain is. You can get close. In North Africa, would it have worked? You've got a large open area to get across. The Germans have got more defences.
I'm thinking of the bit in Monty Python, The Holy Grail, where the knight runs up to the two guards at the castle, where they see him coming for about 10 minutes before. That's a weird way my brain works. We're talking about flamethrowers in warfare, and I'm thinking about Monty Python.
You're of that age, though. You see, unlike me, I'm ever so slightly younger than you, I think.
Oh, dear, okay. But no, I mean, I love a good show, that raises more questions than answers them, because we, as I said at the beginning, people are aware of these weapons, but actually how they work and what the enemy think of them is really interesting. And that bit you did at the beginning about the guy a bit worried about civilian deaths in Le Havre, but fine about using a flamethrower. It's interesting how people's moral compasses get completely, understandably thrown around in the middle of a war.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll leave it there. I look forward to bringing you back on when the Veritable book is actually out and we have shiny copies that we can hold up.
I'll be sucking like crazy once it gets that far.
Well, we'll see you there. And folks, we're back with Matthew Powell tomorrow talking about the preparation of an air doctrine in advance of the Normandy campaign. So the first of our massive series of 80th anniversary of D-Day and Battle of Normandy shows that will be coming your way over the next few weeks. But thank you, everybody, for your brilliant questions. I will see you all again tomorrow. This is Paul Dash for World War II TV saying enjoy the rest of your Monday. Cheers, everybody. Thanks, Derm. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.